What's up, vinyl community? It's Robert Fithen. Some of you that might be a little bit older, around my age or so, remember the original vinyl days. Do you associate artists with labels? I remember back in the day when I was young, there wasn't a lot of entertainment options, so I'd be listening to an album and I'd basically just kind of sit there and look at the album jacket or whatever and read all of it and then watch the label and whatever. So you get to kind of associate that label with that artist if they stay on that label for a while. I was kind of blown away later on in life to find out that some of these labels that I put with these artists are completely different in other parts of the world, like the UK for a perfect example. So I wonder if other people are the same way. Did you grow up kind of putting labels with artists like The Who? The Who always, to me, has been Decca Records, and like The Who, Magic Bus here and all of their earlier stuff. Always on Decca, and then later, of course, Decca was bought by MCA. You got a couple different variations here. Of course, you've got the 70s rainbow label there. You've got the later one with the blue sky that came out. I think this is 1980. They started doing that one. So a couple different variations of MCA and Decca for The Who. But I found out that in other parts of the world, like the UK, The Who is actually on Track Record and Polydor, and even Brunswick and Reaction for their super early albums. But in the US, it's always been Decca and MCA. Couple of Warner Brothers later thrown in there. Queen in the US is not on EMI like it is in a lot of the rest of the world. They are on Elektra here. Do you associate Queen with the Butterfly label? You really only get this with some of their earlier albums. Their later albums, once they become super popular, kind of got custom labels on there, so it doesn't really matter what record label it is. Here's the later Elektra kind of reissues what that would look like. But yeah, Elektra with Queen. Everywhere else, it's, of course, EMI, as it's mentioned in the Bohemian Rhapsody movie. And they even mention both labels in the lyrics of the song Let Me Entertain You from this album, Elektra and EMI. So it was very nice of them to do that. But yeah, Queen on Elektra in the U.S. Of course, in the 90s, they got bought out by Hollywood Records, and that's how all the CDs and everything got released then. Black Sabbath, the early days, got that green Warner Brothers label. That's the one you're looking for. This was actually released the day I was born. And so I made sure I got a first pressing of this, but it doesn't sound that good at all. The green Warner Brothers labels, yeah, they're the originals, but I guess the green label really works for Master of Reality, if you know what I mean. But obviously everybody's looking for those Vertigo swirls. Not only do they look cool spinning around on the turntable, but they sound a lot better. Here's the later Palm Tree Warner Brothers, of course, that you can find Black Sabbath on, and then the later beige labels. Here we go with ABBA. Here in the U.S., I grew up with ABBA, and I think all of their releases here are on Atlantic Records. Yeah, just like the hard rock and the soul music and the Led Zeppelin, Aretha Franklin, all that. Yeah, ABBA here is on Atlantic Records, including, of course, Dancing Queen. Now, where they're from in Sweden, they're on Polar Records. Sometimes they're on Polydor Records in other parts of the world. I actually kind of think that goes a little better with ABBA. I don't see them as an Atlantic artist, even though that's how I grew up with them. Jimi Hendrix here on Reprise Records. The Jimi Hendrix Experience, I should say, on Reprise Records. They got a couple of variations there. There's the orange and tan label. They also have one with a sailboat on there with a little bit later on. Then they just switched to this regular kind of brown tan label here for their later reissues. But yeah, Jimi Hendrix Experience, always a Reprise artist, but of course where he became popular first in the UK, I believe he's Polydor there again. Yeah, the Gloria Gaynor label. Who knew? Polydor putting out the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and people in England and Ireland and Scotland associating Jimi Hendrix with that. But here it's Reprise. Now, if you go into solo Jimi Hendrix, then you get into all kinds of other labels, of course. Rod the Mod, back in the 70s in his disco days, was on Warner Brothers level records. There's those palm trees again. This was like 70s, early 80s. Of course, you got the beige Warner labels later on. In the UK, you will find this album and all of Rod Stewart's 70s, early 80s, mid-70s, early 80s albums on Riva Records, which I thought was really interesting with the tiger on there, because the only artist that I associate here in the US with Riva Records is John Mellencamp. He's the only artist I can think of on this actual label, and it only really goes up to like 85 or so, so really just the John Cougar and John Cougar Mellencamp releases. Peter Gabriel here in the States is on Geffen Records, which always has kind of a kind of a boring label, black, or sometimes it's white, but it's the same kind of deal there. Peter Gabriel and the rest of the world is either on Island Records or on Charisma Records, which has a really cool, interesting label design. And of course, they sound better, especially the German releases for Peter Gabriel. Now, all of these differences all around the world, my goodness, are there artists that bring us all together and we can all relate to the same way that's on the same label? Well, I'm glad you asked. Yes, there are. All the classic Kiss with the makeup is all on Casablanca all over the world. Van Halen is on Warner Brothers all over the world. Don't have to worry about that. Lynyrd Skynyrd, the classic lineup, is always on MCA unless you get a really early pressing on Sounds of the South, which is an MCA subsidiary. Led Zeppelin, always going to be on Atlantic or Swan Song. Elvis Presley, always going to be on RCA unless it's some crazy weird compilation or something. David Bowie, again, his 70s classics, RCA all over the world. The Doors, they're always going to be on Elektra. You can count on the Doors. Fleetwood Mac with the Rumors and, the Stevie Nicks, Lindsey Buckingham lineup. Always going to be on Reprise or Warner Brothers all over the world. Jefferson Airplane's always going to be on RCA all over the world with their classic albums. The Police are always going to be on A&M. And the classic Beach Boys albums are always going to be on Capitol or Reprise, including the now ridiculously, laughably overrated Pet Sounds. Yes, in the last month, I have seen 3 different videos of people saying that Pet Sounds is the greatest album ever, and it lifted my soul and all this kind of stuff. Out of the blue, I had retired my running Pet Sounds joke. They made me bring it back. Pet Sounds. How about the Monkees, if we're going to talk about some 60s album that you might actually want to listen to? Oh, I don't like the Monkees. They don't play their own instruments. I like Pet Sounds. Anyway, when people see this label, yeah, there were a few other artists on it. This is the Cole Gems Columbia Screen Gems label. But mostly in the U.S., if you see this label, it's the Monkees that you're going to think about. And the 45 label as well, which is a little bit different. Here's another great Monkees album with that label on there. And the rest of the world, though, they're on RCA, which I thought was strange. Kind of like just Elvis or the Pointer Sisters. Just RCA artists, so they don't have that special kind of label like they do here in the U.S. Nazareth, always on A&M with their classic albums. They got about 25 of them. They're always on A&M. They're on, I believe, Harvest, or is it, it's the one with the moon, Mooncrest. That's what it is, Mooncrest, and a few other labels as well, but they're consistently on A&M. I've had Love Hurts and this album since I was this is like my first hard rock album ever. I love this album. Anybody else just think this is just a prime rock album? Does anybody else think Nazareth Hair of the Dog is better than any AC/DC album? That's just me. That's where you're going to pull the chain and get off the bus on that one. Not going to go there. Yeah, I love this album. And I had the 45 for Love Hurts. I always thought it was funny to see A&M, label, because the other 45s I had with that were like the Carpenters and Captain and Tennille. And, of course, Herb Albert and the Tijuana Brass. Yeah, another great Nazareth album on the A&M label. But, yeah, Hair of the Dog. Classic album. Madman Across the Water, Elton John in the States here was always either on the Uni label when he first started out, like Madman Across the Water and Tumbleweed Connection and all that. That later, of course, usurped by MCA Records. In the UK, he's on DJM Records, which is, of course, Dick James Music, which puts his name right on the label, or at least his initials. The guy that Elton John's had all these problems with the music publishing over the years. But here in the US, it's usually Uni or MCA. Of course, later on, he's on different labels like Geffen and whatever. Yeah, the MCA. Actually, the first pressings of this have just a generic MCA. They don't even have a design yet because, fun fact, this was the first album ever released on MCA Records, and Crocodile Rock was the first single to ever be released on MCA Records. So there's a little fun fact for you. I thought this was interesting as well. In the UK, they put Tamla and Motown together. Here in the US, of course, they're both under the Motown blanket, Berry Gordy labels, but they are actually different labels. You get Tamla, Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder, a few others. And then you have Motown, the proper label, and all of course, the great artists on that, Four Tops, Smokey Robinson, it goes on and on, Supremes. And what I think is interesting is the UK one is just black with just silver letter, just Tamla Motown. It looks so bland. This is so iconic. that blue, and then the map with the Motown with the colors, and then the star where Detroit is. That is just so iconic. I was so disappointed to find out that that's not how people in the UK have been seeing Motown. It's just really kind of generic Tamla Motown label. The other side of that, though, is the Steve Miller Band. Here's another one of those albums I grew up with since I was a kid, Fly Like an Eagle. It's got a specific label on it, like a custom label for Capitol. And this guy was on Capitol for pretty much his entire, like, 30-year or plus career. And I always thought this was kind of generic. Why would you make a custom label so bland? And then I saw somebody posted on a Facebook group the Blue Phillips label for this. And I just thought, I don't know why, I just love that label. I would love to have a copy of Fly Like an Eagle on that cool, like, blue label, especially since this has a Segway song on there called Blue Odyssey. Certainly better than that really generic-looking Capitol label. Now, like artists like Michael Jackson, kind of an exception. Of course, Michael is on Epic everywhere, but the design in the UK is slightly different than in the US. This is the Epic in the US, and then in the UK. And that's kind of different because usually artists that are on the CBS labels, like, The Clash here is on Epic. You've got Bruce Springsteen, Billy Joel, Blue Oyster Cult, Bob Dylan are all on Columbia in the US. But on the UK, in the UK, they're all on the apparent just CBS record. So it's slightly different, kind of the same, but slightly different. But I can't imagine listening to Bob Dylan on anything but Columbia. And then Bruce Springsteen is the same way. I just totally put those Columbia with those artists, which I usually stay away from Bruce Springsteen and Billy Joel, Blue Oyster Cult vinyl, because Columbia is notoriously bad in the 70s for bad vinyl. So that's a lot of the labels that, they're so, at least I associate them so much with a band, especially back in the day, to find out that they were totally different in the UK, and people have been associating them with completely different labels. And I guess, of course, we get to the biggest example of that there is, and you knew I was going to show the Beatles at one point, so I saved them for last. But yeah, the Beatles, where you have the Capitol is the label in the U.S. There's, of course, the original Capitol black with the rainbow lining. You also, sometimes later on, will have a green Capitol, or maybe you have a red Capitol, looking like that for a nice 70s reissue. Maybe you have a 1978 reissue in the early 80s, too, and you've got a purple Capitol there. But, yeah, Capitol always associated with Beatles, and, of course, we know that's Parlophone in the UK. I never, ever liked the Parlophone logo, though. My goodness, why? Is that a pound sign? Is that a pound sign in that logo? Why would you put a monetary, logo on why would you make that your logo? That seems so crass. There's a story going around that it's a German L. That's not a German L, that's a pound sign. It would be like putting a dollar sign as you're in the U.S. as your logo. I think they did that. Isn't there like Cash Money Records or some rap thing from Florida with the Bayside Boys on it or something? Holla for a Dollar Records or something? Why put a pound sign as your logo? That's just, I'm glad All You Need Is Love is on the Capitol album, so we don't have All You Need Is Love with the pound sign logo on it. I thought this was interesting too. The Beatles, of course, not always on Capitol in the U.S. And then later on, they're on Apple, and everybody has pretty much the same Apple. Some people's are just a little darker green. But this is United Artists, A Hard Day's Night. And I always, thought that this album doesn't have very good sound quality. It's kind of more of just something you have rather than something you throw on. The label's just kind of whatever. And then I saw like a later issue of this with this really cool reissue label. I got to get this. That is just a really sweet looking label for the Beatles' A Hard Day's Night, that later on United Artists design. So that's what I have. Of course, there's many, many other examples of artists who have the same label around the world and artists that have different labels in different countries. I just always think it's interesting because, like I said, growing up and not having a lot of entertainment options and just sitting there watching labels going around and around, you start to associate the label with the artist because that was all that was on the record. You had the record and then the label in the middle of it. So hopefully you got something out of this or enjoyed it, or I brought back a little bit of nostalgia for you. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you associate any acts specifically with the label, or do you just, now it's kind of, it's just a word on a stream thing or on the spine of a CD. It doesn't really mean that much anymore, of course. But back then, that was what you had, the label in the middle of the record. So leave a comment what you think about it, and thank you so much for watching. Consider giving the video a thumbs up if you really liked it, and of course consider subscribing so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks again for watching.